Amazing. Very honored to be talking to you. I have a couple of words to say about brewing and home brewing myself. I still consider myself to be a home brewer, although we've been brewing commercially for the past 11 years. My name is Henok. I'm the co-owner, co-founder, head brewer of a Swedish brewing operation called Omnipollo. We've been around since 2010, and my co-founder is Carl Grandin. He is not here today. His side of the business is on the graphic, which essentially means the bottle artwork and everything beautiful that we managed to put out in terms of the visual aspects of Omnipollo. So we started in 2010 by myself and a graphic designer called Carl Grandin. The idea was to bridge the gap between what we consider to be a lesser form of beer brewed in big batches in macro breweries and a higher form of beer which is brewed in small batches at what you could say call microbreweries. This wasn't a very easy task. We started out in 2010 in Sweden, and essentially, if you wanted to drink a better beer, you had to go to a craft beer specialized bar. And we were a bit tired of that. Our friends wanted to go to nightclubs, and it was a bit of a dilemma. How do you get to drink a good beer, but also go to a nightclub as opposed to going to a specialized beer bar? Today, I'm older. I like going to specialized beer bars, but at that time, this was a problem that needed to be solved. So we started Omnipollo. We're currently brewing at 6 breweries around the world. We have brewed in Brazil actually for a couple of years. But it's not a very active operation that we have today, but it was an incredible, wonderful time that we spent in Brazil before and after brewing there. So I was actually there for about 2 months in total. The other breweries are scattered across Europe and the US. The idea of brewing in different locations for us came from necessity. We just didn't have the money to start our own brewery, but it also turned out that it's pretty convenient to be closer to the consumer, allowing us to provide beer that's maybe more fresh, but also to kind of draw inspiration from the area or the country that we are brewing in at the moment. So I'm going to talk about this in terms of 4 chapters. Kind of my takeaways from this 11-year journey that we're on. Learning by doing has always been my motto, but one thing that I learned very early on, kind of moving from being a home brewer to being a commercial brewer, was that it's very important to learn how to sell beer, rather than just learning how to brew beer. In fact, I didn't know how to brew beer, and I didn't know how to sell beer. So I had to learn both at the same time. We had no experience, no money, and this called for a low-risk strategy on our part, and a bunch of humility. I had homebrewed for about, I think, a year to a year and a half when we released our first beer. The beer was brewed at a brewery outside of Ghent in Belgium. I was living in Brussels for a year for studies at a brewery called the Proefbrouwerij. And the brewmaster there is a kind of a rock star brewmaster, a man I respect deeply, called Dirk Knotz. He's super knowledgeable, and he also has a very deep academic foundation in his brewing. So I guess you could call it a kind of mentorship, simply me being on his door knocking every day to kind of get in, and finally he let us in, and I started brewing there with him. One thing that became very evident early on was, as we brewed beer and put it into tank, we also needed to figure out how to sell it quickly. And I was lucky enough to meet a really great graphic designer. And I think even as a home brewer, you kind of put a lot of love and tender care into the design of what you're packaging, whether it's, a big bottle or a small bottle. You put some label on it, you write, very passionately what you've brewed on the label. And so that was the notion might not be new, but I think what was new to me was, okay, here's a graphic designer that's going to be as important to the success of this company as all other parts. We really need to kind of form an alliance here that will allow us to, A, simply just be able to sell the beer, but also B, be able to take the beer from a craft beer bar to a nightclub, which I mentioned earlier. And that's where Carl Grandin came in. And it was a pretty amazing experience, actually. We saw people drinking, wit beers and IPAs and other things just out of the bottle in a lot of bars around the Stockholm area, which we are from, pretty quickly. Chapter 2, contract brewing and adding value. So contrary to common conception, I think that contract brewing is kind of seen as a quick way to build a business. That's true partly. It's a quick way to get started, but it's a very long journey actually to reach profitability and any type of sustainability where, for example, you can employ somebody. It's a very high volume, low margin game. And what I mean by that is, unless you're adding an extreme amount of value, buying the beer from a brewery and selling it to a customer actually requires you to create something that people are going to pay more for than just buying it from the brewery. And so I think that was very kind of, that was an early realization on our part. And part of the reason that Omnipollo has grown into what it's become, which is to a certain extent, something that's associated with, it's a pompous word, but only innovation, kind of quirkiness, pushing boundaries, and so on and so forth. And it's been great for us to be on that trajectory. It's been a lot of fun. We also get feedback from our drinkers, which essentially, to the word, is what we do. So comments on social media or in person at beer festivals usually render new ideas which materialize in new beers, and I think that's really contributed to what Omnipollo is today, kind of a open source company in a way, where we do stuff that we think is fun and that puts a smile on our face and our drinkers' faces. But I think the key here is brewing a pale ale just wasn't an option. I'll get back to that later now that we have our own brewery. Chapter 3, back to basics. So about a year and a half ago, I walked into an art show that my brother-in-arms, Carl Grandin, had arranged, and it happened to be at a brewery, which was also in a church. So on the bottom floor, there was a brewery, and on the top floor, on the balcony, there was an art gallery. And I was blown away by it because it just suddenly felt like, wow, this is kind of everything that Omnipollo is. You have the brewing with this liquid elixir on the one hand, but you also have the art aspect of it, kind of the pop cultural aspect of what we're doing, and they're all living in one single space. And after having discussed with the previous owner, what the future might look like, they actually agreed to sell it to us. So we took over a church after 10 years of contract brewing and realized we quickly needed to kind of put our own spin to this, and that there might be some interest going into it. And here we are, 4 million euros later. We've built kind of state-of-the-art brewery designed from the mind of a home brewer. And I think it's been a wild ride, because not only did we go to a commercial equipment provider, which, I'm sure they're used to working with a bunch of different types of people with different backgrounds and in brewing, but I think it was quite special to go to a German equipment provider with a lot of tradition and history, and to a certain extent conventions, and say, hey, we're going to need this vessel to be, 40, 50, 60 times the size that it is at any other brewery in the world, because we make this beer with, coconut, 400 kilos a piece or something like that, whatever it is. And it's been a wild ride. The reason we went to a German equipment provider was that we also felt that there's one thing that's been a part of Omnipollo's journey from the beginning, that's been important, is that there's very high rigor in how we brew the beer, not how we conceive the beer necessarily. It's not very stringent. I mean, we can, wake up one morning, have a breakfast, and come up with 3 beer ideas, but it's an idea that, there needs to be a very high level of craft going into the beer, irregardless of what you're putting in there. And Germany, to me, just represents that. Super clean wort, everything we've, like, even from the welders that we had over at the brewery and the quality that they deliver is thought through from the perspective of, okay, if we were to brew a Pilsner on this, how would that taste? And then kind of like backtracking and reverse engineering from there, saying, hey, we're brewing a strawberry, coconut, vanilla, donut stout, but we're going to do it with the same rigor as if we were brewing a Pilsner. And that's what we've done. So downstairs behind me, which I'll show you in a little bit, we literally range the full gamut. So it goes from Pilsner on the one end of the spectrum to Imperial Stouts on the other one, to fruited sours, to IPAs. It's very much kind of why we did this project, since we feel it's a type of beer style that requires minute control. Our added value, brewing an IPA in Belgium, for example, sending it to the US, is marginal in this incredible plethora of, fantastic brewers that are scattered all across the world, or Brazil for that matter. Whereas if we're brewing it ourselves, packaging it ourselves, distributing it ourselves, that's where the added value really comes in for a style like that. Chapter 4, the future. I think, you can, like, I've hinted at kind of where we're going with this, but I think that to us, contract versus brewing ourselves isn't, they're not opposites. I think they complement each other. And for us, it's like been a vision ever since we bought this church, that this church should be a part of an ecosystem, essentially providing what we can't do in other places, providing a sense of place, a sense of home. But also in terms of brewing styles, I think that cleaner hop, yeast, malt, and water-driven beers, if you will be brewed here for Europe, and barrel aging and other types of styles that we're brewing in other places are probably going to continue being something that we do with partners. Not least because we've found incredible quality with the partners that we work with, but also simply because we feel that there's a natural sense of ecosystem that makes sense in that. So I'm going to run down and take you on a short but sweet brewery tour of our church. The reception might be a little bit bad, but bear with me. I'll try to speak as loud as I can. It's kind of a building site right now. I'm going to take you onto the balcony here. As you can hear, there's a lot of noise from builders and others. Here's a bar area that we're working on, with a back bar, which I think is pretty magnificent, with this beautiful church window in the background. You'll be drinking a beer here, where you see my hand. It's exactly where you'll be taking your beer, and then you'll turn around, and behind you, you will see the brewery appearing. And as you can see, the team are busy brewing a beer today. It's in fact a Trillium collaboration. We're doing a version of their Freaky Friday. We're doing a Freaky Friday version of their double dry hop for Point, which is kind of one of the favorite beers I had the first time I visited them in Boston. I'll walk you downstairs. We'll be serving smash burgers and fresh beers from tank, essentially. So right behind me here is the entrance. This is a nice neighborhood that we spent some time in when I was younger, especially. It's about 15 minutes from Stockholm downtown. Here are some horizontal lager tanks. So these currently contain a Pilsner that's been in there for 3 months, which the idea is here to empty one at a time. So you'll never have like a short lead lager. So this one will be emptied, and then you will brewing into that one, and then we'll just move in a circle. So you'll always have like a 3 to 4 month lagering time, which I think is pretty ambitious for a brewery as small as ours to kind of dedicate a space for that. Some bright tanks that we just emptied with IPA. This is an interesting piece of equipment, custom built for us by Braucon. It's a hop gun. But we also use it obviously for coconut, blueberries, coffee, whatever it is. And it has a motor, a rotor motor on the outside of it that looks like a boat motor, basically, which allows us to get incredible extraction from adjuncts and other things we want to put in there. I think this is 30 hectoliters, so that's 3,000 liters. And something similar would probably be more close to, 100 liters or 200 liters. So that's a typical example of something that's been like very much custom built for us, which we're happy about. Thank you, Braucon. Let's see if we can get a look at the brew team working away. This is Alex. Hey, Alex. Behind me is our 20 hectoliter brew house. That's 2,000 liters a batch. We decided to go quite small on the brew house size in relationship to this 8,000 liter tank, simply because we feel that we get a better result when you do more small batches and ferment. So we'll fill a batch up to here, let's say, start fermenting, and then the day after we'll top up with the rest, which gives us a very nice situation for the yeast to do its job in. There the other tank, as you can see, 30s, 60s, and 40s. We have 140. Let's see if we can have a look inside the brew house. We should be done mashing and maybe laundering at this point. Yep, so that's a mash going on there. And then we'll transfer this mash over to the actual lauder tun, which is, in my world, the way I've been brewing before is I've been mashing and laundering in the same vessel, but not in this case. The Germans do it differently. Great. I think that kind of gives you an idea of what we're up to. It's nice. It's almost like its own little town, like just outside of Stockholm Center. But communication is really good here. And to us, it was kind of like we had the choice of going to an industrial area outside of Stockholm and just building a pure brewery, or kind of have an experience-driven brewery. And so we chose for the experience-driven brewery, but with enough capacity to provide beer for export restaurants. Like, yeah, I mean, when we're up and running here, we'll be doing about a million liters plus, which I think for the space is quite an ambitious feat, but we'll see. Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of people associate the Omnipollo brand with innovation and boundary pushing. I think, in fact, it's very synonymous to me personally with the home brewing scene. Like there are no brewers that I've seen out there that are more experimental in how they approach beer than home brewing. And I think that has partly to do with the lack of constraints. I think that as a home brewer, there isn't really a reason that you should not do something because you can't scale up, for example. There isn't also a financial constraint. I mean, really, who cares if your next IPA costs, a couple of dollars more? You're doing it for other reasons than to save money, usually. And I think that contract brewing for us has really allowed us to have that mindset as we've grown, because we've just never had to. We've had the luxury not to care about scale. We've had the luxury not to care about cost either, because our pricing model is cost plus, which sometimes makes our beer very expensive, and we're well aware of that. But it still goes back to the fact that if we want to use, 3 grams of vanilla per liter of beer, we're going to do it. Whereas if you're a commercial brewer, with a brick and mortar brewery, you might start worrying about, like, how am I going to fit an 8,000 liter batch into a tank with 3 grams of vanilla per liter? And so it's something that we're working very hard not to lose as we grow. And even with the church, albeit it's harder to see your bank account kind of going down every month and not worrying about the costs, I think it's a really important part of what Omnipollo does, and the Omnipollo promise and offer, which is don't hold back. There will always be somebody willing to try it and also willing to pay for it. So why not just make a little bit less and find the people that truly care and kind of want to, go the extra mile to get what we've created. Going back to kind of my home brewing days, was I an experimental brewer myself? Sure I was, but more from a perspective of not having tools, to do things the conventional way, and saying, hey, how can I get this flavor out without having, a hop gun or whatever, chemicals to my disposal for brewing or whatever it is. Like, you kind of try things out, you troubleshooting as you go along, I find, as a home brewer, which honestly often yields some of the most interesting results. Some of the best beers I've ever had have been home brews. And a lot of the festivals we go to, more often than not, we'll have a couple of breweries that are very well visited. There will be a long queue, everybody's waiting for their beer, and so on and so forth. And more often than not, you'll walk up to this person who's running this kind of brewing operation, and they're more or less home brewers. It's like, hey, we're brewing in our garage. We started this operation 3 months ago. Before this, these beers were like, you might even at a festival be drinking something that was brewed in their home, simply because they haven't gotten their equipment up and running yet. And it's fantastic. And people just lose their shit because they can't figure out how they made this beer. Well, they didn't care about costs, like, let's be honest about it, number one. And secondly, having, being driven by something else than making money, I think, in fact, renders a lot of the most interesting things in the world. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents around how we've grown up in this, but also my kind of mental approach, which is much more a home brewing driven mental approach than a commercial brewer, which in fact, I swore I would never open a brewery, but now at this point, we're kind of like, okay, as long as we can do it as if we were home brewers, let's do it. So there you have it. I think that I've been fortunate to work with very, very good breweries. In fact, I think every brewer we worked with for the first couple of years were top 100 rated, brewers in the world. And just coming into one of these breweries saying, hey, I want to occupy one tank, when they already have people screaming for their own beer, I kind of required a humility and a sense of, being as smooth and diplomatic around what we were doing as possible, and listening, and trying to learn. And I think the Proefbrouwerij in Belgium is an is a perfect example of that, where you have a very, very deep knowledge, a lab that's, to be compared with any medical, facility in the world. Like, it's an institution almost, the proof was really good for us, because it gave us, as we were adding marshmallows to the beer, we were also like kind of sucking in what was happening around us in terms of stringent, routines and cleaning and, anything that actually makes good beer, yeast management, and so on. And I think that kind of follows us through. There's no coincidence we built a German brewery. I think we are very much interested in being able to produce that perfect Pilsner on the one hand, but we're also very interested in putting a smile on people's faces, which isn't always anonymous. And I think that's, as a home brewer, I'm a learning by doing guy. I didn't, want to, read for 15 years to kind of see whether I was a good brewer or not. I wanted to figure out, can I work with flavors? And then kind of taking it from there. And that's really the approach that I had, at least from the beginning, was, can I work with flavors? Am I good at flavors? And as soon as that was kind of established, everything else fell from there. And it's, it comes at a cost, it comes at time, it comes at interest. But, it's almost, as as a home brewer, like, you have a batch of beer brewing, like, you can't stop thinking about it. What happened yesterday? What was the temperature? How is it tasting now? What if I add this? When should I package it? How much carbonation should I have? Every single step is very occupying. And I think that suits me pretty well. Like, I go all in on stuff that I do. And I think that for the past 11 to 12 years, I've gone all in on brewing. And if you do that, you're going to at least be at a level where when you're messing with convention and when you're not. And that was kind of the format that we worked within, which was, okay, at least figure out what the convention is before you're going to break it. Like, know what it is that you're doing that's so crazy, and why it's so crazy. And just by having that mindset, I think we've kind of found some type of balance between, you come into one of our tap rooms and you drink the pale ale, it's going to be amazing. You drink the Pilsner, it's going to be amazing. But you're also going to go for tap 10, which is going to be a nitro infused, imperial stout or whatever it is, with some crazy ass adjuncts in it. And that's going to be world class too. So it's kind of the idea of finding balance and continuing to build your knowledge base around, why things come out the way they do, because otherwise you can't balance flavor in terms of adjuncts and these bigger, bolder styles either. Obviously, like, that was something that started later. We also started quite soft. I mean, we started with the Belgian style blonde ale. That was our first beer. Like, that's not very crazy, but it is, it was an interesting twist on it with some American hops. And also the artwork was outrageous, like a keyhole symbol in blue colors with, a bunch of animals in it, screen printed onto a bottle. Like, that presentation and the content in a nightclub setting was what was crazy about that product. And then it kind of snowballed from there into other more crazier recipe formulations. Yeah, I mean, I think that what happened is the places that we conceived as nightclubs and finer dining restaurants and, just places where normal people go. Like, those places, they already carry craft beer. They'll have, they'll obviously have their wine list, but they do offer, 5 to 10 craft beers these days. That was not the case 10 years ago. Like, they would have one beer and 100 different wines wherever you would go. And so I think the answer is yes and no. I mean, obviously not every nightclub has craft beer, but yeah, you go to a bar with like loud music and a steamy vibe, and you will see our beer on tap or on bottles in the fridge quite a lot in Stockholm these days, which I think, I get happy every time I see it, because it's like, they have no idea what the hell Omnipollo is. They just like this beverage, which is perfect for me. So yeah, I realized quite quickly two things. When we started contract brewing, everybody was asking, when are you going to open your own brewery? And it's very obvious to me that we were going to need to have two things in place. One was enough money to build a big enough of a brewery for it to have an impact at all. Like 1 million liters is not our entire production, but it will be noticeable in Europe, especially that we've built our own brewery and we're brewing our own beer. And the other thing that was more important to me was, okay, now that we've worked with the most incredible brewers in the world and produced beer that has the name Omnipollo on it, we can't fail on quality when we open our own brewery, and that's going to require a lot of money and time and tender loving care. And I think that was the choice. These were the choices and considerations that made this process a 10 to 11 year journey. That said, we've now opened our brewery and we're very happy with the quality, but we're also still going back to a lot of the specifications that we outlined to Braucon, our German equipment provider, which we're trying to stress test the system to really see if it works. One thing that we can do, for example, is we can brew a 32 Plato Imperial Stout without any added sugar, and that's something that I haven't been able to, achieve. I think anywhere where we've brewed. And on top of that, it's also automated. So I wouldn't say that it's at the push of a button, but it's actually commercially viable to do this thing, based on the fact that Braucon's really dug into that specification. It was a long process to get there, to actually have in writing, hey, this is one of the specifications, because why would you brew a 32 Plato beer without any added sugar? Well, it's nice to have a full-bodied imperial stout, and if we want to go 40 Plato, it's easy for us to do that by adding a bit of sugar. But it's these type of specifications, I think they come very much from a home brewing setting, because I would just simply say, hey, my lauter tun is too small, I want 32 Plato. I'm either going to double mash it to get there, or I'll get a bigger lauter tun. And here in this system, it's like, okay, so how are you going to do that? Well, let's do both. So we both have an oversized mash tun, which is quite, that's a quite common thing. But it's one thing that's not so common is that we can double mash simultaneously by a swivel that you actually turn from one vessel to another. As you've mashed into one, you can mash into the other. I mean, these things they're pure home brewing realizations. How do we get there to this result, but on a commercial scale, which actually makes sense? The other piece of equipment, which is usually the centerpiece of this, is obviously that hop gun, which I would be surprised to hear anybody else with a hop gun that size for a brewery this small. But it makes our life easier. We added mango into it the other day. You just dump it in there, shoot the beer inside, and have it do its thing. Same with coconut, as I mentioned earlier. The dry hopping is amazingly efficient to do in that one, and we're kind of figuring it out more and more. A lot of other things that we've put into this brewery have also come from friends that we met throughout the years, that we've seen do things in a certain way on a commercial scale. And there are a lot of other commercial breweries that come from a homebrewing background, but that also have figured out how to do it even better than they would have as a home brewer, obviously. And we've taken a lot of notes over the years to really try to figure that out. I think our entire Pilsner project comes from that, because I didn't brew a single lager in my home brewing days, and to me this is it's a dream come true to be able to do it on a proper, essentially according to every single rule in the book, and the results are coming out pretty spectacular in that regard. And I think that we're looking forward to the day when we open our tap room here to be able to present these 16 taps and getting feedback. But where we stand right now, I think that's kind of the dream would be that you'd come in and really be able to feel kind of the Omnipollo flavor coming through in these beers. On the one hand, from our homebrewing background, but also us taking a leap from that and starting to produce lager beer in a more engaged way than we've ever been able to do before. So it's it's really been a dream come true.
Yeah, I homebrewed for about 3 years before starting Omnipollo proper, but very sporadically. So I would do a batch, and then a couple of months might pass, and then I'd do another batch. But one thing that became clear pretty early on was that after having brewed beer that was drinkable, it kind of became a question of experimenting. And the cool thing about homebrewing specifically is that cost is not an issue. You don't need to consider cost as an issue, because even if you're adding a crazy amount of vanilla or saffron even, or any other ingredient that might be expensive, you can always kind of lean on the fact that you're using so marginally little that it's not going to ruin you. It's not going to break the bank, so to speak. And I kind of took that with me into my homebrewing journey, and I brewed everything from stouts with crazy ingredients to IPAs with crazy ingredients to sour beers with crazy ingredients. But one kind of memorable realization was a jog that I was out exercising and thinking about beer recipes and kind of how to take it, kind of my next batch of beer to a level that I hadn't been at before, in the sense that I wanted to really try to, combine flavors that are culinary and close by in terms of food, desserts, and so on and so forth. And I think that jog was so specific because I was out jogging and I found wild strawberries in the forest where I was jogging. And I picked those wild strawberries and I went back home. This was early in the morning. We were on vacation and I made a wild strawberry smoothie in our blender. We had rented a summer house for a couple of weeks in the Swedish archipelago. Beautiful, with water and forest, and amazing. And it kind of just like, sitting there drinking that smoothie became intriguing to try to emulate this in beer form. And everything from style to adjuncts going into the beer. In this case, lactose was kind of the most prominent element, in the sense that, it just became very obvious to me that, okay, how do I emulate this in something that gives, retells the story of a smoothie in kind of the most natural way, without bastardizing beer brewing entirely. And lactose is conventional beer ingredient if you look at dark beer, but using that in light beer, at least to me, was a kind of a novelty. And so I started experimenting with that, and actually brewed a wild strawberry, which are to be found almost anywhere in Sweden, smoothie IPA, using mosaic hops, which are known for kind of the strawberry forward aromas, Tahitian vanilla beans. They were slightly softer than the Madagascan, and drinking that beer on a homebrew scale, kind of, such a interesting and satisfying moment, because this, to me at least, was a very clear sign that you can do stuff at home that at a commercial scale might be less viable, at least at an experimental stage. The rest is history in a way. Like I've been fortunate and blessed to be able to take those ideas and commercialize them, but it was not an obvious market for that, at least when I did it back in, I think it was like early 2010s or something like that. And in terms of process, that Google milkshake IPA and you'll find a million different versions of it. I think what we've come to over time is that we've started adding less and less hops to these IPAs. We think that the hops actually clash a little bit with fruit, so it kind of goes against what we were doing in the beginning, where we were just completely smashing these beers with hops. And we are keeping fruit levels kind of at a pretty high level, and we're adding fruit very, very late. So we don't want to completely ferment all the sugars that are in the fruit, simply because we find that they do morph into something else. So fermented strawberry is something different from unfermented strawberry, and you want a bit of both. You want it to be a beer that's fermented, obviously, but you don't want it to be completely dried out, or at least we don't, because we want to give the true and natural flavor, but also aroma, which kind of changes a lot as a fruit is fermenting in the finished beer. But other than that, it's more or less the same as when we started out. A lot of oats to get this soft, silky mouthfeel, a touch of lactose. I think we started at roughly 2 Play-Dohs. You make the conversion worth of lactose. We're down to 1. It's nice with lactose, but it can be a bit overwhelming if it's too much. And also together with these other elements, depending on which vanilla you use, it can become a little bit overwhelming. So one Play-Doh is a sweet spot for us anyway. Vanilla is a cool adjunct. We use it in stouts. We use it in sour beers. We use it in IPAs. We don't use it in pilsners. But it can really vary quite dramatically in terms of flavor. You'll have the fatty, kind of softer notes of some varieties, whereas you'll have the sharper, more spicy notes of other varieties. So I guess you need to experiment. We started out with Tahitian. We love Tahitian, but we also kind of moved into a combination between Tahitian and Madagascan. Madagascan is kind of more, at least in my mind, a quintessential vanilla experience. It gives more of it brings kind of your fantasy into the more clear vanilla as it's supposed to be in a dessert, for example, or a milkshake for that matter. Then a lot of other varieties. It's nice to cut any other variety with some Madagascan, but Madagascan in itself can sometimes become a bit too spicy and sharp, and so it's nice to mix it up. Ugandan vanilla is super nice, but again, this is a question of experimenting and also depending on which fruits you use. So we've moved from strawberries on the one end. I guess the most notable example would be the kind of original milkshake IPA that we brewed with Tired Hands Brewing Company out of Pennsylvania, which uses just normal strawberries into other fruits, tropical fruits. Mango is a perfect example of that. I think it works really well there as well. And you can experiment with everything from, how to ferment mango, but also to how much lactose you want to use. The sweetness of the fruit in itself obviously has an impact on the finished beer. I still brew at home. We're invited for a festival next month. And, although we do have a commercial brewery, I still walk around thinking about brewing a couple of the beers on a small scale system and a couple of the beers on a big scale system. You can't really just exchange the two. Sure, you can. If you have one recipe that you've brewed on a small system that you want to scale up, you can work with that for 2 years to make sure you nail that recipe. But if you just want to whip up a batch, it still makes sense to do it small scale. So go home brewers. Awesome thing. I wouldn't, be me without it. And I keep on kind of trying to push myself to, even though it's labor intensive for a small batch of beer, keep on doing it, because it has a massive impact on how we look at beer, and where, even looking at, say, next year, 2022, being able to do a couple of homebrew batches now, I'm sure is going to inform my decisions around where we're taking Omnipollo next year. So thank you for your time, and good luck brewing.